Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review Quantum of Solace. Now, I mentioned this film when I reviewed Casino Royale a while back, but last night was the first time I watched it again since the theatrical release, and so now I've had a little more time to think about it specifically, because frankly there were some scenes that I had just completely forgotten about. I've watched a lot of Bond movies. I've seen them all, and quite frankly there is some thematic, stylized similarities between them, and sometimes they do blur a little bit. But I enjoyed seeing Daniel Craig again in this role as Bond. He was just, again, so refreshing for me. It's so nice to see Bond being approached as a fresh character, as a new individual, with a much more personal, much more visceral, and quite frankly realistic take on the character than a lot of the previous gadget-laden, self-aware versions of Bond. As I mentioned in the Casino Royale video, I think that Craig is the first Bond to present himself as a real individual in some really difficult, complex situations, as a special forces operative working towards a very specific goal, a person trying to survive to the end of the day, as I mentioned before. As all the previous Bonds were very self-aware that they were a character in a movie, that there was no way they were going to die because they were Bond, and they were going to be present and alive and kicking when those closing credits rolled. I do think that Quantum of Solace is a weaker film than Casino Royale. I don't think it was as interesting, it didn't have as much punch, if you'll pardon the pun. But interestingly, it's the first of the Bond films to be a direct sequel. I mean, this film picks up where the last one ends. We're minutes after the previous film, which I think that in continuity was very pleasant. A lot of the times, even in sequels, you have a time gap between them, and there's a little, kind of backstory between the movie 1 and movie 2. Even present in famous trilogies like Star Wars. And I think that this one had a little bit more of the evil Bond-like international organization out to take over the world concept, but they thankfully were going about it in a much more realistic manner. So, spoilers present here. They're trying to corner a market on the most valuable, most important resource that we as humans possess, and that's water. And if you control a nation's water, you control the nation. Not just their money, but you control the people themselves. And a step towards eliciting control over everyone. So the fact that that was the goal of these people, this organization, was I thought was, if you're going to have this, kind of silly international organization full of, evil dudes, at least giving them a goal that's grounded somewhat in reality was kind of pleasant. It wasn't building giant lasers in space to shoot, capital cities. There were no customized commercial shuttles sailing off to space stations. But Craig was still excellent in this film. I still enjoyed that physical nature of his. He can really convey to me in his facial expressions. There was no smarm. There is no cocky kind of like, oh, I'm James Bond, thank you. There was very much, he's a damaged, broken individual who's really good at what he does. And he's willing to go out on a limb and do things the way he thinks they need to be done, even if the people who are his controllers don't necessarily agree. But the top person in the film, M, trusts him enough to give him the leeway to do what he needs to do. And at the closing sequence, when the film comes to its end, and you see Bond finally get his revenge against the character that you never actually see in the first movie, and M says, I need you back, and his reply is, I never left. He was always loyal to the crown. He may have taken a sidestep to make sure that some personal loose ends got tied off. But at the core, Bond was always in His Majesty's Secret Service. He was always right there doing the best he could for his nation. And just being the blunt, bloody, vicious tool that nation sometimes needs.